Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls. Chapter 1. When I left my office that beautiful spring day, I had no idea what was in store for me. To begin with, everything was too perfect for anything unusual to happen. It was one of those days when a man feels good, feels like speaking to his neighbor, is glad to live in a country like ours and proud of his government. You know what I mean, one of those rare days when everything is right and nothing is wrong. I was walking along whistling when I heard a dog fight. At first I paid no attention to it, and after all it wasn't anything to get excited about, just another dog fight in a residential section. As the sound of the fight grew nearer, I could tell there was quite a few dogs mixed up in it. They were boiling out of an alley and turned and headed straight towards me. Not wanting to get bitten or run over, I moved over to the edge of the sidewalk, and I could see that all the dogs were fighting one. About 25 feet from me they caught him, and down he went. Well, I felt sorry for that unfortunate one. I knew if something wasn't done quickly, the sanitation department would have to be picking up a dead dog. I was ready to try and make up my mind on helping when I got a surprise. Out of that snarling, growling, slashing mass reared an old red-boned hound, and for a second I saw him. I caught my breath. I couldn't believe what I had seen. Twisting and slashing, he fought his way through that pack, backing up under the low branches of a hedge. Growling and snarling, they formed a half-moon circle about him. A big bird dog, bolder than the others, darted in, and the hedge shook as he tangled with the hound. He came out as fast as he fell over backwards, and I saw his right ear was split wide open. It was too much for him, and he took off down the street, squealing like a scalded cat. A big ugly cur tried his luck, and he didn't get off so easy. He came out with his left shoulder laid open to the bone. He sat down on his rear and let the world know that he had been hurt. By this time my fighting blood was boiling. It was hard for a man to stand and watch an old hound fight against such odds, especially if the man had memories in his heart like I had in mine. I had seen the time when an old hound like that had given his life so that I might live. Taking off my coat, I waded in. My yelling and scolding didn't seem to have much effect, but the swinging coat did, and the dogs scattered and left. Down on my knees, I peered back under the hedge. The hound was still mad, and he growled at me and showed me his teeth. I knew it wasn't his nature to fight a man, though. In a soft voice, I started talking to him. "Come on, boy," I said. "It's all right. I'm your friend. Come on out now." The fighting fire slowly left his eyes, and he bowed his head, and his long red tail started thumping the ground. I kept on a coaxing, and on his stomach, an inch at a time, he came to me and laid his head in my hand. I almost cried at what I saw. His coat was dirty and mud-caked. His skin was stretched drum-tight over his bony frame. The knotty joints on his hips and shoulders stood out a good 3 inches from his body, and I could tell that he was starved. I couldn't figure it out. He didn't belong in town. He was far out of place with the boxers and poodles and bird dogs and other breeds of the town dogs. He belonged in the country. He was a hunting hound. I raised one of his paws, and there I read the story. The pads were worn down slick as the rind as an apple. I knew he had come a long ways, and no doubt had a long way to go. About his neck was a crude collar. Upon closer inspection, I saw that it had been made from a piece of check-lined leather. 2 holes had been punched in each end, and the ends were laced together with baling wire. As I turned the collar with my finger, I saw something else, and there, scratched deep in the tough leather, was the name Buddy. I guessed that was the crude scribbled letters that had been written by a little boy. It's strange indeed how memories can lay dormant in a man's mind for many years. Yet those memories can be awakened and brought forth fresh and new just by something you've seen or something you heard, or the sight of an old familiar face. What I saw in those warm gray eyes of the friendly old hound brought back wonderful memories, and to show my gratitude I took hold of his collar and said, "Come on, boy, let's go home and get something to eat." He seemed to understand that he had found a friend, and he came along willingly. I gave him a bath and rubbed out all the soreness from his muscles. He drank quarts of warm milk and ate all the meat that I had in that house, so naturally I hurried down to the store and bought more, and he ate until he was satisfied. He slept all that night and most of the next day, and late in the afternoon he grew restless. I told him I understood, and as soon as it was dark, he could be on his way. I figured he'd had a much better chance if he left town at night. So that evening, a little after sundown, I opened the back gate. He walked out and turned around and looked at me. He thanked me by wagging his tail. With tears in my eyes, I said, "You're more than welcome, old fellow. In fact, you could have stayed here as long as you wanted to." He whined and he licked my hand. I was wondering which way he would go. With one final whimper, he turned and headed east. I couldn't help smiling as I watched him trot down the alley. I noticed the way his hind quarters shifted over to the right, never in line with the front, yet always in perfect rhythm. His long ears flopped up and down, keeping time with the jogging motion of his body. Yes, they were all there, the unmistakable marks of a hunting hound. When the alley emptied into the street, he stopped and looked back, and I waved my hand. As I watched him disappear in the twilight, I whispered those words, "Goodbye, old fella. Good luck and good hunting." I didn't have to let him go. I could have kept him in my backyard, but to pen up a dog like that's a sin. It would have broken his heart. The will to live would have just slowly left his body. I had no idea where he'd come from or where he was going. Perhaps it wasn't too far, or maybe it was a long, long way. I tried to make myself believe that his home was in the Ozark Mountains somewhere in Missouri or Oklahoma. It wasn't possible, though, even if it was a long ways from the Snake River Valley in Idaho. I figured something drastic must have happened in his life, as it's very unusual for a hound to be traveling all alone. Perhaps he'd been stolen, or maybe he had been sold for some much-needed money. Whatever it was that had interrupted his life, he was trying to straighten it out. He was going home to the master he loved, and with the help of God, he'd make it. To him, it made no difference how long the road or how rough and rocky. His old red feet would keep jogging along, on and on, mile after mile. There'd be no crying or giving up, and when his feet grew tired and weary, he would curl up in the weeds and rest. Water from a rain puddle or a mountain stream would quench his thirst and cool his hot, dry throat. Food found along the highway or offerings from a friendly hand would ease the pangs of hunger. And through the rains, the snows, or the desert heat, he would jog along, never looking back. Some morning, he'd be found curled up on the front porch. The long journey would be over. He'd be home. There'd be a lot of tail wagging and a few whimpering cries, and his warm, moist tongue would caress the hand of his master. All would be forgiven. Once again the lights would shine in his dog's world. His heart would be happy. After my friend had disappeared into the darkness, I stood and stared at that empty alley. A strange feeling came over me. At first I thought I was lonely or sad, but I realized it wasn't that at all. The feeling was a wonderful one. Although the old hound had no way of knowing it, he had stirred memories, and what priceless treasures they were. Memories of my boyhood, an old K.C. Bacon powder can, and 2 little red hounds. Memories of wonderful love, unselfish devotion, and death in its saddest form. As I turned to enter my yard, I started to lock the gate, and then I thought, "Nah, I'll just leave it open. He might need to come back." I was about halfway to the house when a cool breeze drifted down from the rugged Tetons. It had a bite in it, and goose pimples jumped out on my neck. I stepped up on the woodshed and picked up several sticks of wood. I didn't turn on any lights upon entering the house. The dark, quiet atmosphere was a perfect setting for the mood that I was in. I built a fire in the fireplace and pulled up my favorite rocker. And as I sat there in the silence, the fire grew larger, its crackling and popping. Firelight shadows began to shimmer and dance upon the room. The warm, comfortable heat felt good. I struck a match and lit my pipe, and as I did, 2 beautiful cups gleamed from the mantel. I held the match up so that I could see a little better. There they were, sitting side by side. One was large, with long, upright handles that stood out like wings on a mourning dove. The highly polished surface gleamed and glistened with a golden sheen. The other was a smaller one and made of silver. It was neat and trim, and sparkled like a white star in the heavens. I got up and took 'em down. There was a story in those cups, a story that went back more than half a century. And as I caressed those smooth surfaces, my mind drifted back over the years, back to my childhood days, and how wonderful the memories were. Piece by piece, the story unfolded. End of chapter 1.